Welcome, everybody. I'm Danica Izzard, and I'm with OSSTF Toronto. I'm a secondary teacher, and I'm also the co-chair of the Equity Committee. Just a little bit of housekeeping. While you're not speaking, you can just mute yourself. That'll help with the sound. And we're going to have we have three speakers here that are going to be giving us some presentations. Brandon Hayes, who's the president of the Toronto Public Library Workers, CUPE 4948. We also have Alika Hendricks, and I hope I pronounced it correctly, who is from LAO Lawyers, the Society of United Professionals, and as well as we have Chris Campbell, who is the Equity and Diversity Rep from the Carpenters Local 27. So welcome to our three presenters, and maybe we can just get started with Brendan.
Okay. Hi, everybody. So I just wanted to speak briefly in connection to what we're talking about today in terms of eliminating racism. And obviously, I'll talk about more of a local lens in terms of what we've done at the Toronto Public Library Workers Union, Local 4948. So I am the president of the local, as was mentioned, and thank you, everybody, for joining. I just want to say that we've had a couple of issues over the years at the Toronto Public Library, specifically relating to the use of space at the library by hateful groups. And so there was an incident a couple of years ago where there was a Holocaust denier who was also a lawyer who passed away. And a group arranged to use library space to memorialize this person, I guess, for some sort of a funeral type of thing. And so the library concluded that that request for the use of space did not violate room booking policy at the library, despite outcries from even the mayor, from city councilors, and obviously unions and labor groups. And we found out about it very late in the process, so there wasn't really an opportunity to try to disrupt the event or get it canceled. But we did do a presentation, the local did a presentation to the Toronto Public Library Board, and a couple of people here were involved with that, including John Cartwright and Mr. Farber that was
give me a marker, sweetie?
mentioned earlier. And there was a lot of outcry from the public, and the library basically did not really move on that topic, but it was something that we felt that we needed to unite about to stand up against white supremacy and anti-Semitism. Flashing forward a little bit more recently, obviously there were a lot of events recently with anti-Black racism in the States and even in Canada and Toronto. And the city librarian, who is the CEO of the Toronto Public Library, she released an email to staff acknowledging anti-Black racism and acknowledging that as an issue, but she failed to address that as an internal issue among staff at the library. So there was a lot of outcry from many employees, including Black employees, obviously. And I was approached by a number of my members and some other people to do a presentation along with Gobi Suryakumar, who is our vice president of the local. And we did a presentation for 20 minutes, actually, at the Toronto Public Library board meeting. And they typically only give us 5. So we thought that it was very important, and they made an exception for that presentation. And long story short is that we heard from a lot of people who said they felt racism from members of the public. They felt racism from their colleagues, their coworkers, their superiors, and we put quotes that we heard from people. We connected it to the Yes It Matters campaign with Labor Council and the Charter for Inclusive Workplaces and Communities. And it led to some positive change, and obviously very eye-opening change for the library management, who is typically not from minority-seeking groups, although most library workers are. And so a couple of outcomes we got from that was the library created a new manager of equity and labor relations position. They've since come up with an anti-Black racism plan that is still in the early process in terms of consultation and things like that. But we did feel that it was important to speak up against these issues because obviously when you create spaces for your members and you tie it into the workplace and the community, it only strengthens, I think, the union movement, aside from the obvious commitment to equity and social justice that I think all of us are in tune with, or should be in tune with. So the work is not done. This is just the beginning of the library acknowledging this issue. Even within our union, I'm sure there's lots of examples of racism. So we're addressing that too with our union representatives. And basically why I think unions should get involved is that we see over the years that whenever there's incidents of Islamophobia or attacks against women or even attacks against the LGBT community, there is a need, I think, for allyship. And we do have to speak up and speak loudly against these issues or for causes that we support. And I'm even reminded of the recent events in the States with anti-Asian racism promulgated by the former president, whose name I won't mention. But we did see the violent incidents recently against a number of women that were attacked in the States. So I think it's very important for all of us to speak up when we see these issues, do what we can locally, and hopefully that will connect to systemic changes that will enhance society and deal with these issues. So I don't want to speak too much longer because I know we just have a little bit of time, but thank you for the invite, and I'm looking forward to hearing from the other speakers.
Thank you so much, Brendan. So next we'll go to Alika.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're hearing me okay. I know we've had some sound issues. Are you hearing me? Great. So yes, I am the GTA Unit Director at the Legal Aid Ontario. That's what LAO stands for, Lawyers Local with the Society of United Professionals. The Society is a union that's 8,000 members strong. I'm co-chair of the Society's new Coalition of Racialized Professionals, and that's a group dedicated to making space to have conversations about the experience of racialized workers across the various locals and to equip and educate members to tackle the issues of inequity that they see in their workplaces. Our local represents staff lawyers providing services to low-income Ontarians, which comprises various marginalized groups, including diverse racialized communities across the province. Many of our members, myself included, represent clients in conflict with the law who are going through the justice system. And so our members see firsthand the impacts of systemic racism and who gets stopped by police, who gets charged and for what, who ends up getting bail or not, and as a result is able to exercise their right to a trial, or who instead feels they have no option but to take a plea deal rather than languish in custody awaiting their trial. Over the course of 2020, with the deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, amongst others, certainly discussions about police violence were happening amongst our members, and there was a call to action. Our members wanted our union to push for change. And so we brought together a group of our members as part of our local's equity advisory group, which advises our local executive, to draft a paper on policing that would capture the experiences with police violence as seen through the eyes of our clients, and echo the call to combat crime by increasing funding to community programs targeting the root causes of criminality, a call that came to be known more popularly and somewhat more sensationally as defunding the police. As we all know, there are a variety of perspectives on this issue because it is complex, but we brought our policing report on systemic racism to the Society's board for consideration and review, and that ultimately led to plans to create a multi-phased approach with ongoing advocacy and education of members over the course of years, not weeks or months, because we know it takes time to make this change real. So that effort is a work in progress, as are so many initiatives in the vein of dismantling systemic racism, but each initiative helps to move the dial forward, and we're proud of having seen that forward. Our local has also been working on dismantling systemic racism in another area of effort, and that is our actual collective agreement has an appendix, an equity appendix, where the employer is required to conduct a review to examine how representative or not its staff are as compared to the communities that we serve, and whether a special program is warranted to ensure that recruitment, retention, and promotion of staff would be more reflective of the diverse communities that our clients come from. So right now we're in the process of holding our employer accountable to actually carry out this work, which started with our employer first having a better understanding of the diversity of its existing staff by conducting a diversity and inclusion survey. And of course, we were glad to see our employer engaged in this work in compliance with what we had bargained. But even here, we had to keep them accountable to do this review the right way. We reviewed the questions in the diversity inclusion survey before it was circulated and found that it did not adequately account for people of mixed race identities and multiple identities. For example, being both Indigenous and Black wasn't captured. And so we pointed out that a survey that cannot fully account for how a person identifies themselves and which forces them to choose aspects of their identity over others falls short of the intended target. So we continue to work with our locals equity advisory group and with our employer to determine how best to move this equity review process forward. In addition, though, our work has led to the employer creating an equity and diversity coordinator position, and that person also facilitates the employer's equity, diversity, inclusion committee. We have a representative on that committee as well, and right now we are reviewing our employer's 5-year plan for equity, diversity, and inclusion. And the point here is that our feedback as unions continues to be critical, even with employers who are trying to do the right thing or who want to be seen to be doing the right thing.
Next, we'll go to Chris Campbell. Sorry about that. Sometimes we have the technical difficulties. Chris Campbell, who is from the equity and diversity rep from the Carpenters Local 27.
Nice. Hopefully you don't lose my internet stays up. So hi, brothers and sisters. Today is the International Day of Elimination of Racism. Good. Now, Canada is one of the best countries in the world to live. My 5 children were born here, but there are racist issues that we have to improve. I started as an apprentice 30 years ago with the Carpenters Union Local 27. I am the equity diversity representative of the Carpenters District Council, like you mentioned earlier. I'm also the co-chair of the Toronto Community Benefits Network. Last year, we saw George Floyd murder played over and over on TV, followed by Black Lives Matter peaceful protests. The news is on sites, on Toronto construction sites. Yes, the first news was at Michael Gordon Hospital. This was played over and over in the media. First, we was told that it's an isolated incident. Then they directed the media to Black representative of the industry, and the truth was uncovered a little bit more. We spoke about the good, the bad, the highs and lows. In other words, we acknowledged that most of our colleagues were hard-working, respectful individuals. Yes, our white colleagues, right, were hard-working, respectful individuals. On the other hand, there are a few bad apples that hang nooses, uses derogatory names to address BIPOC workers, write offensive graffitis on the walls. Then there are contractors and unions, hiring halls, that has racist practice. Yes, it happens internally also. The last known case in the media of nooses being on site was a week and a half ago at Leaside Station, where 3 workers were sent home while police and Crosslink is investigating the last news that was on site. A lot of the cases of discrimination, racism, sexism go unreported because of the fear of being blacklisted by the contractors or the union, etc. You may end up being labeled as a troublemaker or pay the price of moving on to another career in the industry. In February of this year, John Tory brought forward a declaration of inclusive workplace and community. This was signed by Contractors Association, and the construction unions in Toronto. This absolutely does not fix racism in all our industry. Absolutely not. However, the principle of acknowledging that there is a problem is the first step to improving working condition for BIPOC individual on the construction site in Toronto. Another significant part the Carpenters Union is the implementation of an anti-Black racism workshop. This course will start the 10th and 11th of April at the union office. Eliminating racism is a long shot in our industry, but as a unified voice standing in solidarity, discrimination will make a huge difference going forward. Brothers and sisters, thank you for your 3 minutes. Hope I didn't go over it. Go ahead, guys.
Thanks very much, Chris, and to Alika and to Brandon.
Yes, because there's been some very rich discussions that have been had from our panelists so far, from the speakers. And I know that that there were some questions about the paper that Alika mentioned, and questions about if it was possible to get access to that. So maybe, I don't know if that's possible, Alika?
Sure, so I'll just say that it certainly wasn't drafted with the intention of wider circulation. It probably needs to be edited and cleaned up for that purpose, but I'll certainly make that inquiry, and I'm not exactly sure who I'd be in touch with to make sure that it gets to whoever's interested in it, but happy to follow up with anyone about that.
Okay, that's helpful, thank you. You know, because it sounds like there's a lot of interest in the topic that you were in the information that we're sharing. And then there's a question about how to navigate when your union creates a false dichotomy between collective agreement pieces and necessary anti-racism work that would support the safety of racialized, marginalized members. So I don't know if there's anyone that would want to maybe comment on that. I know that's a big.
I'll take a stab at it. Very quickly though, workplaces are supposed to be safe places. Racism and systemic racism does not create safe environments. So when that false dichotomy comes up, one might argue that it is in addressing racism is in fact creating safe workplaces, and see if that takes you somewhere.
Thank you, Sharon.
I think I'd echo that. I think that is a false dichotomy sometimes, the perception that you know, working conditions is somehow separate from dealing with equity concerns. And I just don't think that's accurate for the reason that's just been described. It needs to be a safe place for everyone, and that includes people feeling like they belong. And so creating an inclusive workplace is an effort towards that end.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Well, just while we're waiting for that, I will certainly say in the construction industry, Chris talked about you know, those issues, but the community benefits network that Chris is now the labor co-chair of Toronto Community Benefits Network, we've been negotiating essentially employment equity in the construction careers in the major infrastructure projects. But that means unions have to actually look at their you know, how they bring people in, how they engage their training centers, how their dispatch works, so that if we are saying you know, a percentage of the hours have to be performed by workers of color, Indigenous or women, that can be accommodated. And of course, it's a very tough conversation with the contractors to make sure they're doing those things. So part of the ongoing work is you know, unions themselves really looking deeply at their own practices. And please go to youtube.com Labor Council to see the movies written about, made about Bronnie Armstrong and the work of the Toronto Joint Labour Committee on Human Rights. You'll see Welcome to Dresden. You'll see Welcome to Canada. It's a story about how our labor movement and the Black community in Toronto went to Ottawa in 1954, demanding a change of the racist immigration policies in this country. You see, you know, how we won the first actual human rights legislation anywhere in North America because of the work here in Toronto. And for those who don't know, there's that writer Lawrence Hill, you may have heard of him. There's a writer, there's a singer Daniel Hill, you may have heard of him. Their mother Donna Hill, when their parents first came to Canada from the United States, her mother Donna Hill worked for the Toronto Joint Labour Committee on Human Rights and helped craft some of the strategies that brought about the first human rights legislation. So go read the Book of Negroes or go listen to the song Sometimes When We Touch, and you'll understand some of the roots there. Just put up your hand as a participant and we'll start just talking while we're waiting for this technology. Who wants to talk?
Yes. So perhaps I'll put the question in the chat here.
Valerie Joseph, I see you got your hand
Hi
up.
there. Valerie Joseph, QP Local 79, Executive Board Member. I can't say that there's one particular thing that inspires me, because all the stories, I've heard them before and I'm familiar with them. What I'm more interested in today is how are we going to make this good trouble? Not just to reminisce on what has happened, like that's there, it's done. What are we going to do about it? That's what I want to know. And that's why I want to be part of this making good trouble movement, okay? We have racism in the union as well. Nobody wants to talk about that, but it's there. And we cannot be hypocrites and want to fight the employer and want to fight the world when we are also racist, okay? So that's the elephant in the room that needs to come out. What I think we can do, we should have some kind of action plan going forward in tackling the systemic racism, because that's the root. We want to get to the root. And then when we can dismantle that, as a group, we have to be in cohesion. We have to be allies. We can't be saying, well, it's just my people. No, it's all of us. And I think that when we can do that and come up with some sort of tangible action plan to start dismantling and breaking down this big beast, because look, we're fighting a pandemic called COVID, but there's another pandemic called racism. So we have two pandemics. And look at some of the things we're doing to fight COVID. But what are the things that we're doing to fight racism? That's food for thought for today. So I don't have all the answers, but I definitely am on board, and I would like to see that we can try to come up with a tangible action plan that we can work with to start to effect the change or the changes that we want to see, not just talk about them. Thank you.
So this is my inspirational part. I've always been active, with Toronto Yacht District Labor Council in terms of attending work of color conferences and whatever events that John Cartwright would send my way. But what kind of sparked me last year was, and I often tell folks about this, I was watching the death being played over and over with George Floyd on TV, and my kids were at home one evening, and they were sitting beside me, and we were watching the news with my wife all together, and my kids said, "Dad, what are we gonna do? This, we can't just sit. We can't just sit." And they're looking to me to say and do something, that would leave something with them that they'll remember for the rest of their life. And so I went to my office. Because I got a call the same night from Yolanda of Coalition of Black Trade Unionists to come out on Saturday. Went to my office and I saw our provincial representative, the leader, and I said to him, "I'm going to march in the Black Lives Matter peaceful protest." And this is what that man said. I was expecting him, because my union is more Italian, Portuguese, and Anglo-Canadian, right? Primarily. I'm expecting him to go, "Chris, you're gonna catch COVID, don't go, or say something kind of discouraging." But the man looked at me and says, Go march in Black Lives Matter peaceful protests. I remember what it was like to be a young Italian man growing up in Toronto. And that just freaking make me put me in a mindset that if I was that's what that moment by saying something like that to me, that I wasn't expecting. So I did it, and I took my kids down there and I marched in the Black Lives Matter peaceful protest. And from there I became active and spoke out on the job sites when there were nooses, and things just started going in a absolutely different direction that I've been expecting, because at the end of the year I was then appointed the editor of the province. I work community benefits network. So just by as your family, your kids saying the right things to you and having one or two key people that are there to inspire you, to push you on. And I that's where my inspiration came from to become this active and to be going in this direction. So maybe someone else has something else to share about their inspiration.
I see Dave Callahan and then Ryan Singh. I think we're having some technical problems with the breakout, so we may not got there, but Dave and then Ryan briefly.
Okay, this may seem to be somewhat removed from this, but I think it highlights a common problem. On Friday, I attended a Zoom that dealt with long-term care homes. And one of the things that came out of that is that there's a mechanism that people could use. Families of the residents of these homes can form a council that can then bring issues forward. And someone who was involved in the legal system, a lawyer, basically, sort of confirmed that if you bring something forward in connection, for example, with your own family, then what can happen? Well, maybe you find out that the management is not too happy about that, and suddenly your family member is not really treated fairly. So I look at this and I've been thinking, the same kind of thing comes up. You're working as a carpenter or in some trade, and all of a sudden people are thinking this is a troublemaker. And so instead of pointing out an injustice and getting fairness and some redress, it turns out that it's sort of like it's a discouragement, a disincentive for the person to even come forward. And I've wondered, there's a system that the United States has that involves not auditor generals, but inspector generals. And these are people where whistleblowers could come forward and be somewhat anonymous, but here's a legitimate issue, report this, name all the specifics, it can be investigated, and then it's like, it doesn't matter who brought this forward, there's a problem here, whether it's the government not enforcing the law or any number of other ways that the right thing is not happening. And I just wonder if maybe, I don't know if that's under the Ontario Human Rights Commission, where we already have that kind of a mechanism, but there's obviously, whether it's long-term care homes or on the work site, that there can be a disincentive for people to come forward, because once a person is identified, it could, in a sense, backfire on them where the wrong thing ends up happening. So I don't know if there's something we should be looking at there. And just on the other side, these documents, I hadn't really thought about this before, because usually here's a document from the Labor Council. Can we just have endorsement on this? But I thought, and with the labor, if you like, the legal aid lawyers, I was thinking, well, you know what? Maybe there's one particular provision of that. We could say, you know what? Here's something that's happening that has widespread support, and we need redress on this particular issue in this particular case. And I'm thinking that's something I hadn't quite connected together, but maybe that could be something that could be inspiring to help us to move these issues forward.
Go ahead, Danica.
Yeah, go ahead. Next we'll go to Ryan. And I think we're going to wrap up after, soon after. I just want to, I just wanted to, direct everyone to our equity guide and the Yes It Matters campaign. Those are really interesting comments that you made. And I see that Ralph's made a comment asking if there's any unions that have a quota, and I'm not sure if that's something that people want to kind of ponder on. But next we'll go to Ryan, and I think we're gonna wrap up maybe after Ryan's comments. Just because I'm just cognizant and want to be respectful of people's time.
Thank you for the opportunity. I've worked in many different areas. I'm the guy that have over 24 jobs at any given time, and it allows me to work at the government level and speak with ministers and decision makers, to working with policy makers, and like the Black Experience Project, racialized research study that was done by Environics, also working at the different unions. And one of the things I see consistently, and we've heard the anecdotes over time, is that oftentimes Black people would come in, do a lot of the work, and then watch the people they train get positions of opportunities. And one of the things I often say in that exposure is that we're often being promised opportunities, the 40 acres and the mule, but we get the 40 acres, or we provide the skill set and different things, and never really get our rewards in the services we provide. And it becomes very expensive if we were to pursue any kind of opportunities to correct the wrongs that may be done. Let's say we were discriminated and we have to get a lawyer. Oftentimes we don't have the resources as persons of color to go and pursue that legal route. And we're left stressed, broke, and don't want to participate in the economic fields. What has happened since George Floyd, and I've noticed this in many different areas, is people have actively taken the opportunity to create provisions and create a leeway for others to come in and participate. And this is what has been missing, is that change makers have to take the active opportunity to create a room to be inclusive for everyone to participate in. And I think that is the real change, is that we all have to see this vertically and horizontally in our workplaces.
Thank you so much, Ryan, for those comments. And so I apologize, I actually didn't see, but we do have one more person, Ralph, and that will be our last speaker. And then we will wrap up. Okay, so Ralph, the floor is yours.
Yes, thanks, Sister Danica. I just wanted to say all of you are my inspiration. And I just wanted to thank John for all of his work over the years. And I hope we bump into each other, John, as you contemplate your retirement. I wanted to say that a member approached me and he said, look, perhaps we could have, in a unionized environment, jobs that are designated, a minimum order jobs designated for racialized workers, or else we'll never get out of this. So I put it in the chat, wondered if people had knowledge of unionized places that have such a quoted system. Thank you.
Actually, I can jump in on that, and that, we just put it in the chat. We did win federal employment equity laws many, many years ago. It's still there, in fact, and that's one of the reasons you see some diversity in public services. But of course, the Mike Harris Conservatives scrapped the NDP law on employment equity, and the community benefits network negotiations with Metrolinx was actually the first instance of employment equity since 1996 in this province. But we are trying to push many organizations to consider what that would look like at the local level, at the municipal level, and the school boards is very much part of the conversation of how we're moving forward. So we did promise people we'd be out of here, by about 4:30. We want to apologize for the little problem around getting the chat room, and really thank everyone for coming with us today on this journey. Again, if you go to laborcouncil.ca equity, the equity page has a great deal of information. The Yes, It Matters campaign takes the Charter of Inclusive Workplaces and Communities and doesn't just put it on a wall. It uses it as a discussion tool to take it down through your executives, through your stewards, through your staff, and asking that every union take that and have conversations at every single workplace, naming anti-Black racism, naming systemic racism, and actually challenging how the union, how management, how the public institution, as we've heard from the library workers, can in fact create deep and lasting change and to try and dismantle systemic racism. So I want to thank Danica for co-chairing this little session. Thank CUPE 4948 for helping to host this Zoom workshop, and thank all of you for taking time out on a gorgeous sunny Sunday and being part of this change and this journey. Thanks a lot.